Ambassador Kextal trembled as she watched the holographic display showing the advancing enemy fleet. Thousands of black ships moved like a deadly swarm through the Theta sector, leaving nothing but death and silence behind them. The Zephyrian coalition had held this region for over 3 centuries, but now everything was falling apart. "Status report," she demanded, her 4 arms working frantically at the control console. Her species, the Veltar, were known throughout the galaxy for their diplomatic skills and peaceful nature. They had never faced anything like this before. Commander Yilneth, a tall insectoid officer, clicked his mandibles nervously. "The outer colonies have gone dark. Kepler 442, New Harmony, the research stations at Beta Centauri. All of them. No survivors, no distress signals after initial contact. They just vanish." The enemy had appeared 6 months ago from beyond the galactic rim. Nobody knew where they came from or what they wanted. They called themselves the Devourers, and the name fit perfectly. Every world they touched became a barren wasteland, stripped of all life and resources. No negotiations, no demands, no mercy. Kextal pulled up the tactical display. Red markers showed the path of destruction across 12 star systems. Each marker represented millions of lives lost. How long until they reach the core worlds? At their current pace, perhaps 2 standard weeks, Yilneth replied. Our defensive fleets have tried to slow them down, but their technology is unlike anything we've encountered. They absorb energy weapons, and our kinetic rounds barely scratch their hulls. The ambassador closed her large, dark eyes. The coalition had always prided itself on peaceful solutions. Their military existed mainly for peacekeeping and rescue operations. When the Devourers first appeared, the coalition had sent diplomats. The alien response had been to turn the diplomatic ship into atomic dust. What about our allies? The Crystalline Hegemony? The Trade Federation? The Hegemony has already withdrawn their forces to protect their own borders. The Trade Federation is debating sanctions. Yilneth's tone carried barely concealed disgust. Politics, as usual, while worlds burn. Kextal moved to the large viewport and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the unstoppable enemy was coming. The coalition's remaining fleets were scattered and demoralized. Their best admirals were dead. Their strongest worlds had fallen. Soon, the Devourers would reach the capital system, and everything would end. There is one option, Yilneth said quietly. The humans, Kextal whispered. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Humanity was the galaxy's newest member species, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. They had been granted limited membership in the galactic community, but most species kept them at arm's length. Humans came from Sol 3, which the xenobiologists had classified as a Class 12 death world. The gravity was crushing, the weather was violent, and the native life forms were terrifyingly aggressive. Somehow, humans had not only survived, but thrived in such conditions. The few interactions with humans had been unsettling. They seemed friendly enough, but there was something about them that made other species nervous. They were too strong, too fast, too aggressive. They solved problems by hitting them until they broke. Their military doctrine focused on overwhelming force and rapid assault. Most civilized species found their methods barbaric. Ambassador, the Terran embassy has been offering assistance since the crisis began, Yilneth reminded her. Perhaps it's time to accept their help. Kextal knew the politics involved. If she contacted the humans, it would be seen as a sign of weakness. Many coalition members believed that involving humans would be worse than dealing with the Devourers. Humans were unpredictable. They were violent. They came from a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years and had failed. But they were also the only species in the galaxy that had never lost a war. Open a channel to Earth, she said finally. Maximum priority transmission. The communication array hummed to life. It would take several minutes for the signal to reach the Sol system. Kextal composed herself, knowing that this single decision might determine the fate of trillions of beings. The hologram of a human appeared on her screen. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the typical human features that many aliens found disturbing. His skin was dark, his eyes were sharp, and when he smiled, it showed predator teeth. "Ambassador Kextal," the human said. "This is Admiral Marcus Washington of the Terran Defense Force. We've been monitoring your situation." "Admiral," Kextal began formally, "the Zephyrian Coalition formally requests military assistance from the Terran Union against the hostile force known as the Devourers." Washington's expression became serious. "Ma'am, we've been watching those ships for weeks. Our deep space monitoring stations have been tracking their movement patterns and technology. We're ready to respond immediately." "Immediately?" Kextal was surprised. Most military operations took days or weeks to organize. "Yes, ma'am. The moment we detected the Devourers, we began preparations. Our third fleet has been standing by in the outer system for the past month, fully loaded and ready for combat deployment." Kextal felt a chill. The humans had been preparing for war while the Coalition had still been trying to negotiate. "How many ships can you send?" "The third fleet consists of 237 vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts and 48 heavy cruisers. But, Ambassador, I need you to understand something about how we operate." "What do you mean?" Washington's expression grew even more serious. "When humans go to war, we don't fight clean. We don't follow the standard rules of engagement that most civilized species prefer. We fight to win, completely and permanently. If you request our assistance, you're authorizing us to use whatever methods we deem necessary to eliminate the threat." Kextal thought about the burning worlds, the dead colonies, the millions of refugees fleeing the approaching darkness. "What methods are you referring to?" "Total warfare, Ambassador. We'll target their supply lines, their command structures, their civilian population if necessary. We'll use psychological warfare, biological agents, nuclear weapons, antimatter bombs, and anything else in our arsenal. We'll chase them back to whatever hole they crawled out of and make sure they never threaten anyone again." The casual way Washington described such devastating tactics made Kextal's blood run cold. This was why other species feared humans. They didn't just fight wars, they waged campaigns of complete annihilation. But as she watched another red marker appear on her tactical display, marking the death of another world, she realized they were out of options. The Devourers had shown no mercy. Perhaps it was time to unleash something equally merciless in return. "Admiral Washington," she said, "the Zephyrian Coalition formally authorizes the Terran Defense Force to engage the Devourers with full military force. Use whatever methods you deem necessary." Washington nodded grimly. "Understood, Ambassador. The Third Fleet will depart within the hour. We'll rendezvous with your remaining forces at the Proxima staging area and coordinate our assault." "How long until you arrive?" "Standard transit time to your position is 18 days. We'll be there in 12. Washington's smile returned, but it wasn't reassuring. "Ma'am, I want you to know that humanity has never forgotten that the Coalition welcomed us into the galactic community when others wanted to keep us isolated. We won't let the Devourers destroy what you've built." The transmission ended, leaving Kextal alone with her thoughts. She had just invited the galaxy's most feared warriors to fight an enemy that had proven unstoppable. Either she had just saved the Coalition, or she had doomed it to face an even worse fate. Commander Yilneth approached her station. "Ambassador, I'm receiving reports that human ships are already moving out of the Sol system. Their response time is incredible." Kextal nodded, watching the tactical display. Soon, two of the galaxy's most dangerous forces would collide: the Devourers, who consumed everything in their path, and the humans, who came from a world that had forged them into perfect killers. She could only pray that when the battle was over, there would still be something left to save. As the hours passed, more reports came in from the advancing Devourers. Another system had fallen. Another billion lives had been snuffed out. But for the first time since the crisis began, Kextal felt a spark of hope. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the human fleet was coming. They carried weapons that other species had banned as too destructive to use. They followed tactics that civilized beings considered barbaric. They came from a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill them and had only made them stronger. The Devourers had never faced anything like them. The countdown had begun. In 12 days, the galaxy would learn what happened when an unstoppable force met humanity's unbreakable will. The Devourers had brought death and destruction to peaceful worlds, but they had never faced a Deathworld's children when they were truly angry. Admiral Marcus Washington stood on the command bridge of the TDF Retribution, watching as the massive dreadnought powered up its engines. Around him, his crew moved with practiced efficiency, their movements quick and precise. Every human on board knew what was coming. They had been preparing for this moment since the Devourers first appeared on their long-range sensors. "Sir, all ships report ready for departure," called out Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen from the communications station. "The fleet is awaiting your orders." Washington nodded, then activated the fleet-wide communication system. His voice would now reach every human warrior in the Third Fleet, over 40,000 souls who had volunteered for what many considered a suicide mission. "This is Admiral Washington to all ships. Today we answer a call for help from our allies in the Zephyrian Coalition. An enemy calling themselves the Devourers has been systematically destroying entire worlds, killing billions of innocent beings. They have shown no mercy, no honor, and no willingness to negotiate." He paused, looking out at the stars where his fleet was assembled. The sight never failed to impress him. 237 warships, each one designed and built by a species that had learned warfare in the harshest school imaginable. Earth had taught them that only the strong survived, and they had taken that lesson to heart. The Coalition has asked for our help because they know something about humanity that others in the galaxy seem to forget. We are not like them. We did not evolve on peaceful garden worlds under gentle suns. We come from a place that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We learned to fight because we had to. We learned to win because losing meant extinction. The crew around him stood straighter, their faces showing the grim determination that had carried humanity from the caves of Africa to the stars. These were the descendants of survivors, the children of warriors who had never known defeat. The Devourers think they are unstoppable. They have swept aside every fleet that faced them. They believe that nothing in this galaxy can stand against their might. Washington's voice grew harder. "Today, we teach them about Earth." The communication ended, and Washington turned to his tactical officer. "Commander Torres, status on special weapons?" "All antimatter torpedoes are loaded and armed, sir. Nuclear arsenal is at full capacity. The new plasma lance batteries are showing green across all systems. Commander Isabel Torres had been born on Mars, but her ancestors came from Mexico." She carried the quiet intensity that Washington had learned to respect in all his officers. "The Biological Warfare Division reports their payloads are ready for deployment." Washington nodded. Other species in the galaxy had banned most of these weapons as too inhumane to use. Humans had no such qualms. When facing an enemy that showed no mercy, mercy became a luxury they couldn't afford. And the psychological warfare package? Dr. Yamamoto's team has prepared a complete cultural analysis of the Devourers based on their attack patterns and communication intercepts. If they have any concept of fear or morale, we'll find it and exploit it. That was another thing that set humans apart. They didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with their minds. Every human military unit included specialists trained in breaking enemy will to fight. It was a skill developed through thousands of years of warfare against their own species. The fleet began to move, accelerating away from the Sol system at speeds that would have been impossible for most alien vessels. Human ships were built for speed and endurance, designed to fight in the vast emptiness between stars where there was no help coming and no safe harbor to retreat to. "Sir," called the navigation officer, "we're receiving updated intelligence from Coalition long-range scouts." "Put it on the main display." The holographic tactical display showed the current position of the Devourer fleet. They had just finished consuming another system and were moving toward their next target. The efficiency was terrifying. Each world was stripped completely bare in less than 72 hours, leaving nothing but lifeless rocks behind. "Analysis, Commander Torres?" "They're following a predictable pattern, sir. They hit the outer colonies first, then move inward toward the population centers. They seem to prefer systems with high biomass concentrations." Torres highlighted several systems on the display. "If they maintain their current course and speed, they'll reach the Coalition capital in 11 days. "Which means we'll intercept them here." Washington indicated a point in space near the Kepler system. "How many ships are we facing?" "Current estimate is approximately 1,500 vessels, ranging from frigate class to something our sensors can't properly classify. The largest ships are over 10 kilometers long and appear to be heavily armed." Washington studied the display. 1,500 ships against his 237. The odds were worse than 6-1. In traditional galactic warfare, this would be considered an impossible situation. No sane commander would engage such overwhelming numbers. But Washington wasn't a traditional galactic commander. He was human. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command." "Put it through." The hologram of Admiral Rebecca Harrison, the head of Terran Defense Command, appeared on the display. Her gray hair and weathered face showed the marks of 30 years in military service, including 3 colonial wars and the infamous Centauri Rebellion. "Marcus, I'm uploading additional intelligence packages to your fleet. Our deep space monitoring stations have been analyzing the Devourers for weeks. We think we know what they are." "Go ahead, Admiral." "They're not from this galaxy. Our xenobiology teams believe they're a hive mind species that evolved in a galaxy where they consumed all available resources. They're essentially cosmic locusts, moving from galaxy to galaxy and stripping everything bare before moving on." Washington absorbed this information. "Any weaknesses we can exploit?" "Possibly. The hive mind structure means they have centralized command nodes. Take out enough of their command ships, and the rest might lose coordination. Also, they seem to have no experience fighting opponents who use weapons of mass destruction. Every species they've encountered so far has tried to minimize collateral damage." A cold smile crossed Washington's face. "Well, they haven't met us yet." "Exactly. Marcus, I'm authorizing the use of Project Sundeath if necessary." Washington felt his blood chill. Project Sundeath was humanity's ultimate weapon, something so terrible that it had been used only once in human history, during the final days of the Centauri War. The memory of what it had done to the rebel fleet still haunted him. "Understood, Admiral. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." "Good hunting, Marcus. Make them regret leaving their home galaxy." The transmission ended, and Washington returned his attention to the tactical display. His fleet was now moving at maximum speed toward the intercept point. Behind them, Earth was organizing additional fleets, but they wouldn't arrive in time to affect the outcome of this battle. "Sir," the sensor operator called, "I'm detecting additional human vessels approaching from the Centauri system." Washington looked at the sensor display in surprise. "Those aren't Third Fleet ships. Who authorized their deployment?" "Sir, it's the Colonial Defense Force. Looks like volunteers from the outer colonies." The sensor operator's voice carried a note of awe. I'm reading 67 vessels, including the CDF Defiance and the New Australia. Washington recognized those names. The Defiance was the flagship of the colonists who had defended the Tau Ceti system against pirate raids for 15 years. The New Australia carried the survivors of the Kepler disaster, humans who had learned firsthand what it meant to lose everything to hostile aliens. They're requesting permission to join the fleet, sir. Granted, add them to our order of battle. Now he had over 300 ships, still outnumbered 5-1, but better odds than before. More importantly, every human in the fleet understood what they were fighting for. They had seen the reports from the devastated worlds. They knew what would happen if the Devourers weren't stopped here. The hours passed as the fleet continued its journey toward the intercept point. Washington used the time to review battle plans with his staff. Traditional tactics wouldn't work against such overwhelming numbers. They would have to rely on human innovation and the willingness to use methods that other species considered unthinkable. Sir, we're receiving a communication from the Coalition fleet, the communications officer reported. Admiral Velthara requests a planning conference. Put her through. The image of a tall, elegant alien appeared on the screen. Admiral Velthara was one of the few Coalition officers who had survived the initial encounters with the Devourers. Her species, the Ethrans, were known for their tactical brilliance and their sophisticated approach to warfare. Admiral Washington, I must express my gratitude for humanity's response to our crisis. However, I am concerned about your fleet's size relative to the enemy force. Perhaps we should consider a defensive strategy rather than direct confrontation. Washington studied the alien admiral's face. He could see the fear there, the accumulated stress of months of losing battles against an unstoppable enemy. Admiral, with respect, defensive strategies haven't worked against the Devourers. They've destroyed every defensive position they've encountered. Yes, but attacking them directly seems inadvisable. My tactical computers estimate your survival probability at less than 12%. Admiral, our computers don't factor in human stubbornness. We've never met a battle we couldn't win if we were willing to pay the price. Velthara looked uncomfortable. What price are you referring to? Washington's expression grew serious. Whatever it takes, Admiral. We didn't come here to survive. We came here to win. The transmission ended, and Washington returned to his planning. He understood Velthara's concerns. Most species fought to minimize casualties and protect their assets. Humans had learned a different lesson on Earth. Sometimes, survival required the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Sir, the navigation officer announced, we'll reach the intercept point in 6 hours. Washington nodded. Soon, they would face the enemy that had terrorized the galaxy. The Devourers had never encountered resistance like what was coming for them. They had never fought an enemy that had been forged in the fires of a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill them. They were about to learn why the rest of the galaxy whispered about the death world called Earth, and why its children had never known defeat. The human fleet raced toward destiny, carrying weapons that peaceful civilizations had banned and tactics that gentle species considered barbaric. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had never been defeated. It was exactly the kind of fight that humans had been born for. The Devourer command ship received the strange signals just as they entered the Kepler system. The hive mind processed the information through thousands of linked consciousnesses, trying to understand what they were detecting. Energy signatures unlike anything they had encountered in this galaxy. Ships moving at impossible speeds. And something else, something that made the collective consciousness feel an emotion it had not experienced in millions of years. Uncertainty. Through their shared awareness, the Devourers had consumed 17 galaxies. They had faced every form of resistance imaginable. Energy beings that existed in pure thought, machine intelligences that could replicate themselves infinitely, warrior species that fought with religious fanatics. Nothing had been able to stop them. But the signals they were detecting now were different. These weren't the weak, inefficient weapons of the species they had been destroying. These were the signatures of something much more dangerous. The hive mind directed its attention to the edge of the system, where their sensors detected the approaching fleet. 304 vessels, tiny compared to their own 1,500 ships. But as they analyzed the energy outputs, the Devourers began to realize they might have underestimated this new enemy. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Admiral Washington watched as his tactical display updated with real-time information about the enemy, 1,500 ships arranged in a classic consumption pattern, with the largest vessels at the center and smaller ships forming protective barriers. All ships, this is Admiral Washington. Execute Plan Ragnarok. The human fleet immediately began to spread out, moving in patterns that would have looked chaotic to any other species. But Washington's officers understood the strategy. They weren't trying to form traditional battle lines or protect key assets. They were positioning themselves to create maximum destruction. "Sir, the Coalition fleet is requesting coordination," the communications officer reported. "Tell Admiral Velthara to stay back and protect the refugee convoys. This is going to get messy." Washington activated the fleet tactical network, allowing every human ship to share sensor data and coordinate their attacks. It was a level of battlefield integration that other species had tried to achieve for centuries but never managed. Humans had developed it naturally, the product of fighting endless wars on a world where perfect coordination meant survival. "Enemy fleet is moving to intercept," Commander Torres announced. "They're maintaining formation." "Of course they are. They don't know what they're dealing with yet." Washington studied the approaching enemy ships. "Begin psychological warfare operations." Across the human fleet, specialized broadcasting equipment began transmitting on every frequency the Devourers used. But these weren't normal communications. Dr. Yamamoto's psychological warfare team had prepared something special. The broadcasts began with recordings of Earth's most dangerous predators, the roar of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, the howl of a pack of wolves, the scream of a hunting eagle. Then came the sounds of human warfare. Artillery barrages from the Battle of Stalingrad, jet engines from aerial combat over the Pacific, the whistle of incoming missiles. But the most unsettling part was what came next. Human laughter. Not the gentle laughter of peaceful beings, but the harsh, predatory laughter of warriors who were about to do something terrible and were looking forward to it. The Devourer hive mind recoiled from the broadcasts. In all their eons of existence, they had never encountered a species that broadcast sounds designed purely to intimidate. Most species tried to communicate, to negotiate, to find peaceful solutions. These beings were doing the opposite. They were announcing their intention to cause maximum damage. "Sir, enemy fleet is beginning evasive maneuvers," the sensor operator reported. "They're breaking formation." Washington smiled grimly. The psychological warfare was working. The Devourers were already making their first mistake by abandoning their coordinated approach. "All ships, weapons free. Engage at will." The human fleet opened fire, and the space between the two forces exploded into deadly light. But this wasn't the careful, measured combat that the Devourers had faced before. The humans weren't trying to minimize damage or capture enemy vessels. They were firing everything they had with the single goal of destroying as much as possible. Antimatter torpedoes streaked through space, each one carrying enough destructive power to vaporize a small moon. Plasma lances created beams of pure energy that could cut through the heaviest armor. Nuclear missiles detonated in brilliant flashes, releasing radiation that would contaminate enemy ships for decades. The Devourer fleet returned fire, their bioorganic weapons launching streams of corrosive plasma and living projectiles that could eat through metal. But they quickly discovered something that no previous enemy had prepared them for. The human ships didn't try to avoid damage. Instead, they seemed to embrace it. "Direct hit on the Yorktown," Torres reported. "They're venting atmosphere and their main engines are offline." "The Yorktown is requesting permission to execute ramming maneuver," the communications officer added. "Granted," Washington replied without hesitation. The heavily damaged cruiser changed course, accelerating directly toward the nearest Devourer ship. As it approached, the human crew activated their ship's self-destruct sequence. The resulting explosion consumed both vessels in a ball of nuclear fire. This was something the Devourers had never encountered. Species fought to preserve their ships and crews. They retreated when damaged. They surrendered when facing certain death. They didn't deliberately sacrifice themselves to cause more damage. But humans had learned different lessons during their evolution on Earth. Sometimes the only way to ensure the survival of the group was for individuals to sacrifice everything. It was a concept that social species understood intellectually but rarely applied in practice. "Sir, we're getting reports from across the fleet," Torres announced, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. "Enemy resistance is decreasing. Their formation is completely broken." Washington studied the tactical display. The Devourer fleet was scattering, individual ships trying to escape the seemingly insane humans who fought like cornered animals. But the humans weren't letting them escape. They pursued each fleeing vessel with relentless determination. "Target their command ships," Washington ordered. "Torres, deploy the biological weapons." "Sir, are you sure? The Coalition specifically requested that we avoid weapons of mass destruction." "The Coalition isn't facing extinction." "We are." Washington's voice was cold. "Deploy them." Across the human fleet, specially designed missiles began launching. Each one carried a biological agent specifically engineered to target the Devourer's biological systems. Human scientists had analyzed captured samples and created viruses that could consume the organic components of their ships. The effect was immediate and devastating. Devourer vessels began to literally dissolve as the biological agents ate through their hulls. The hive mind screamed across their communication networks, a sound of pain and terror that the humans recorded for future psychological warfare operations. But the humans weren't finished. Washington had one more surprise prepared. "All ships, execute Sundeath Protocol. Target the enemy flagship." Every human captain understood what that meant. They had hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but the Devourers had proven too dangerous to allow any possibility of escape. Project Sundeath was humanity's ultimate expression of their willingness to do whatever was necessary to win. The TDF Retribution and 11 other dreadnoughts began charging their most powerful weapons. These weren't normal shipboard armaments. They were planet killers, weapons designed to crack worlds and destroy entire solar systems. Humanity had developed them during their darkest hour, when they faced the possibility that their own colonies might be taken by enemies who would use them as bases for further attacks. The principle was simple and terrifying. If you couldn't hold something, you destroyed it completely so that no one else could use it either. The Devourer flagship was a massive vessel, over 15 kilometers long and containing the primary nodes of the hive mind. Destroying it would cripple the entire enemy fleet, but it was also heavily shielded and protected by hundreds of smaller ships. The humans solved this problem in the most direct way possible. 12 dreadnoughts fired simultaneously, focusing all their planet-killing weapons on a single target. The combined energy output was equivalent to the explosion of a small star. The Devourer flagship simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a vast alien structure that had commanded the destruction of billions of lives. The next moment, there was only expanding plasma and radiation. The effect on the rest of the Devourer fleet was immediate. Without their central command node, individual ships began to behave erratically. Some continued fighting, but their coordination was gone. Others simply shut down, their biological systems unable to function without the hive mind's guidance. "Sir, enemy fleet is in full retreat," Torres reported. "The survivors are fleeing toward the Galactic Rim." Washington nodded. "Let them go, but make sure they understand what happens when they threaten peaceful worlds." The human fleet began broadcasting on all frequencies, sending a message that would follow the fleeing devourers wherever they went. It was simple and direct, translated into every known galactic language. "This is Admiral Marcus Washington of the Terran Defense Force. You have attacked and destroyed the worlds and peoples under our protection. This is unacceptable. You have two choices. Leave this galaxy immediately and never return, or face the full military might of humanity. We have weapons you cannot imagine, and a willingness to use them that you cannot comprehend. Choose wisely." The message was accompanied by detailed recordings of the battle, showing exactly how the human fleet had destroyed a superior enemy force through sheer determination and ruthless tactics. It was a warning to any other species that might consider threatening the galaxy's peace. As the battle ended, Washington finally allowed himself to relax. They had won, but the cost had been significant. 43 human ships had been destroyed, and over 8,000 crew members had died. But they had saved trillions of lives and sent a clear message to anyone watching. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Coalition fleet," the communications officer reported. Admiral Velthara appeared on the screen, her expression showing a mixture of gratitude and terror. "Admiral Washington, the Coalition owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. Your sacrifice has saved our civilization." "Just doing our job, Admiral. Humanity doesn't abandon its allies." "I must ask, Admiral, those weapons you used, that level of destructive capability, how do we know that humanity won't use them against other species?" Washington studied the alien admiral's face. He understood her fear. They had just witnessed what humans were capable of when they decided to destroy something completely. It was a sobering demonstration of power. "Admiral, humans learned a long time ago that the strongest species has a responsibility to protect the weaker ones. Earth taught us that survival requires strength, but civilization requires using that strength wisely. The galaxy is under our protection now. Anyone who threatens it will face the same fate as the Devourers." The transmission ended, and Washington looked out at the debris field that had once been a seemingly unstoppable enemy fleet. The Devourers had learned what every other enemy of humanity had discovered eventually. You could defeat humans in individual battles. You could outnumber them, outgun them, and outfight them. But you could never outlast them. And if you pushed them far enough, they would find a way to destroy you completely. The human fleet began the journey home, carrying news of their victory to the scattered worlds of the galaxy. Behind them, the space around Kepler system glowed with the radioactive remnants of the Devourer fleet. It would serve as a monument to what happened when an unstoppable force met humanity's unbreakable will. The galaxy was safe again, and everyone in it now understood exactly why the other species had been right to fear the children of Earth. They had arrived in flames and left their enemies as ash scattered across the void.